Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. I'm not gay. Okay, so how many of you believe that when you read John chapter 1, that you knew what it was saying right away? Right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh. Right? The Word is the Spirit, and the flesh stands for the presence of the Spirit, more specifically. Okay, but it also stands for the Spirit in a sense because it's standing for the presence of the Spirit. So the Bible is coded. And from John, from the very first chapter, from the beginning of the first chapter all the way to the end, is no exception. It's coded. Just like Genesis chapter 1, right? In the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. Okay, you don't know what it's talking about. It's a mystery. It's coded. And the language is symbolic and figurative. And Christ is the living Word. The language of God, as used in the Bible, is symbolic and figurative. And it first and foremost is the actions. We have to look at the timeline to see the actions of the devil and the actions of God. For example, neocolonialism, the actions of the devil. Pretending that colonialism was a good thing, the actions of the devil. Pretending that the churches were doing God's work is the actions of the devil. Telling the complete truth about these things in the divine order, the actions of God. Pretty straightforward, right? So now let's go to John chapter 10 and we'll overkill this point. For some of you who are like, hey, I don't think it's figurative, I think it's literal, and I think the Jewish people, you'll see that I'm right here. John chapter 10, the good shepherd and his sheep. Very truly I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And what? And leads. And the word being used here is leads. And leads them out, right? The word lead. Going back to the first video on this playlist, I believe it was, where I said the word deal is the word lead scrambled. Who's leading who, right? Versus who's the robber and the thief. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. The word being used here is voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. The word being used here is voice. We'll get to this in a second here. So what does it say in the next verse? It says, Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Right? Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. So he's speaking figuratively, and they don't understand what he's saying. Okay, I'm going to have to go over time in this video. Now, you might say, well, why does it bother to say that he's speaking figuratively if he's speaking figuratively the whole time? Because the Bible's by Bel, and Bel is a deity of confusion. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So let's go to, so first of all, the voice has to do with the actions. We know that from Psalm 19, right? John is after Psalm 19 in the Bible when you go through the books in order. Okay, so the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands, right? So it's speaking, right? The voice are the actions, right? Actions speak louder than words. The spiritual actions, the divine actions, the actions of God, the presence of God and how it's moving, right? To spirit away means to take something away. It's an action, right? Okay, so in John chapter 7, we're going back to John chapter 7, and we'll go to verse, okay, so I didn't write it in that part of the notes, but I have it here. Bear with me here. John chapter 7, verse 38. Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them. Right? So he says, whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them. The next verse it says, by this he meant the Spirit, whom those who believe in him were later to receive. Up to that time the Spirit had not been given, since Jesus had not yet been glorified. So the author at that point decides to explain to you, this is figurative. Okay, so just like he did in John chapter 10, back in chapter 7, he says, this is figurative. right? In John chapter 1, he doesn't say, this is what is meant by in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So he doesn't say the author is speaking in a way that is figurative, and this is what it means. Okay? It gives you a little hint, like in verse 9, it says, the true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. Okay? It still doesn't explain to you what it is. You see that from the very beginning, it's speaking in a way that's figurative, and he doesn't explain to you in a way it is. We'll prove that definitively when we get to chapter 16, okay? So, okay. Let's go to John 10, verse 19. The Jews who had heard these words were again divided. Many of them said, he is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why listen to him? But others said, those are not the sayings of a man possessed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind, right? Can a demon become the top martial artist ever possible? No. Can the demon open the eyes of the blind? No. Okay, so they're disagreeing about what he's saying. They don't understand him. I said, what is he talking about? He's speaking some kind of figurative language, right? Let's go to John chapter 11, let me touch on this briefly. I didn't write this in my notes yet. We'll get to that. He's talking about Lazarus, and says, Lazarus has fallen asleep. And they're like, well, why don't will you not just wake up? And it says, no, that's not what he's saying. He says, no, well, look, what I'm telling you is that he is dead. Now, in what form he's dead is a story for another day. Okay? He says he is dead. Okay, so they don't understand his language, and he's speaking figuratively. Go all up to chapter 16, from John chapter 1 to chapter 16. That pattern is the pattern of teaching. It's a holistic approach that tells us that the cloud Christ comes back on at the end of the story is figurative. And we connect it to Isaiah 30, a story for another day. But let's just go to John 16 real briefly here. John 16, verse 25. Though I have been speaking figuratively, a time is coming when I will no longer use this kind of language, but will tell you plainly about my Father. It says, though I have been speaking figuratively, a time is coming that has not had come. It isn't at that point. It isn't before that point. It says, though I have been speaking figuratively. Okay, now the author of the Bible is following the same pattern of teaching and thinking, and they're speaking figuratively in anticipation of that time. My point has been definitively proven if you're paying attention. Again, though I have been speaking figuratively, a time is coming when I will no longer use this kind of language, but will tell you plainly about my Father. So it is with the Old Testament. They're also speaking figuratively. Read Isaiah, read Jeremiah. Look at it very carefully. Look at how Jeremiah is explaining things. He says, I saw this vision. The book of Daniel, I saw this vision, and this is what it's, and I'm interpreting it for you partially. So the language of the Bible is symbolic and figurative, and they're drawing parallels between things. Like the Jews being quote-unquote chosen is really about something else. Think about it. Okay.